Welcome to Great Loop Radio, brought to you by America's Great Loop Cruisers Association. We're dedicated to sharing Great Loop information and inspiration with those actively cruising, planning for, or dreaming about a Great Loop adventure. I'm Kim Rousseau. I'm the director of AGLCA, and today I'm really excited to continue our story of our Loop series. And our guests today will be Karen and Lee McClellan. They'll tell you all about themselves as we jump into this. But before we start, I do want to take a moment to recognize and thank our Admiral sponsors who support AGLCA at the highest level. They are Curtis Stokes and Associates, Passage Maker Trawler Fest, Skipper Bob Publications, and Waterway Guide Media. As always, we encourage our listeners and viewers to support these businesses that support the Great Loop. Karen and Lee, welcome to Great Loop Radio. Thanks for joining me.
We are so glad to be a part of this. Probably the Loop was one of, if not the most significant things that we've had to happen with us. We've been married for 19 years, and this was a big adventure for us, and we loved it. We loved every minute of it.
Well, and I do meet a lot of loopers, but the two of you are one couple that I remember meeting early on in your journey, because you both just had such a joyful spirit about being out there and doing this adventure. So I was so excited when we kind of put out the call for anyone who would be interested in this series when we got the email from the two of you, and I'm thrilled that you're with us. Can't wait to catch up with what you've been doing since the Loop. But, before you and I just dive into our own catch up, let's bring everybody else up to speed on the two of you. Start off with a little bit about yourselves and why you decided to do the Great Loop.
Well, it is a story in itself. Really, the plan for retirement was Lee wanted to move back home. And by moving back home, that's McClellanville, South Carolina. And so we bought property right before the bottom fell out of the market in '08. And so we've had this property in McClellanville, and really thought that we were going to build our retirement home. And fast forward to 2013, I was in the faculty lounge. I'm a retired professor of nursing, and I was in the faculty lounge, and there was a Parade magazine on the table in there, and it was a couple on a boat. And I could tell by the background they were in Chicago, because to Lee's horror, he married a Yankee woman. I grew up in Indianapolis. And in fact, I lived in Nashville for 8 years, and he told everybody in his family I was from Nashville, because he said my daddy'd roll over in his grave if he knew I was marrying a Yankee woman. But anyway, so I grew up in Indianapolis, and I grew up, my father had many years in the Navy, and we always had boats, and boated on the Ohio River and Lake Michigan. And he started talking about this Loop thing. And I was like, Loop thing? What in the world? I was geographically challenged. I could not get how you could circumnavigate 2/3 of the country and not really spend a whole lot of time in the Mississippi. I couldn't get that, but nobody probably could really get it until the Tombigbee Waterway was formed. So anyway, I could tell on the background on this picture that was on this Parade magazine that this couple was in Chicago, and they were on a boat. And I'm like, what is this all about? So I picked it up, and they were doing the Loop. And so I read the article, and I went home, and Lee worked on shrimp boats for 2 years, being from McClellanville, which is a little fishing village. So I go home, and I'm like, can you drive a big boat? And he goes, what do you mean a big boat? I said, like a 40-foot big boat. He goes, yeah. And I said, and I had this magazine. I said, I want to do this. And he said, what? He goes, okay. And because he's always up for an adventure. And so we started the whole process. We joined the Loopers Association and went to our first rendezvous in Rogersville, met Curtis Stokes, and that whole idea was launched, and we spent then the next 7 years or so planning. We bought our boat early on. We bought our boat in 2013 because it was the right boat in the right place. It wasn't the right time. We weren't ready to do it, but it was a 38-foot Chung Hwa Trawler, and it was located in Galveston. Well, actually on Tiki Island. And so we went down there and we looked at a lot of boats. And you know, we looked at a lot of boats online. Lee referred to it as you can probably edit this out, but you know, we did the whole boat porn thing. Looking.
Oh, yep. We have a lot of members who are addicted to their boat porn. Yep.
And you know, and he was absolutely sure that he wanted a single engine. And because being on those shrimp boats, they all have a one engine. And they're 70, 80 foot boats that those guys just get where they need to get them and they don't have any problem with them. And he said, you know, whenever, if you have engine issues, it's usually fuel and that's going to affect both engines. And so it was the perfect boat. It had a single Ford Lehman. And so here we are. We've now purchased ourselves a boat, but we're not ready to start the loop yet, nor do we want to keep it in Houston or the Houston area, because just the thought of driving through all that Houston traffic on Friday afternoon to get to it made us both crazy. So we moved it to Beaumont, Texas. And so that's where we kept it until we were ready to begin. Then we moved it back to Clear Lake because you know, we needed to hire some skilled labor, some skilled folks to do some stuff on the boat. And that was the best place for us to be.
Yeah. So you told us a little bit about the boat, you know, and that the single engine was especially important to Lee, which I love that perspective because there are so many people who want two engines, you know, for the security of having a second engine if something goes wrong with one. So it's very interesting to hear a very experienced commercial mariner prefer the single engine. And I think that'll open a lot of eyes to the fact that there really are a lot of possibilities out there. So thanks for sharing that. But tell us a little bit more about the boat. Besides the fact that she had a single engine and she was in the right place, what made her your perfect looping boat?
Well, for us, I told Lee, I said, now look, we got to have a pretty sizable outdoor area. We've got to have space on this boat. And, you know, we got done with the loop and I can guarantee you probably our marriage was stronger at the end of it. But when you think about you're going to be living in 300-ish square feet for
if you're
a
lucky,
long time, you got to have space. And so one thing that I loved about this boat is that it had a big fly bridge, a very livable fly bridge. And so that was important to us. The boat was easy to get around. It had deep walkways. And for me, that was because I grew up on Lake Michigan. I knew what those Great Lakes were like and how rough they could get. And so, and only two places I was ever seasick. One was crossing Mobile Bay. That is a treacherous bay. It can get very rough very quick. And the other was on Lake Michigan. The only two. And we were in open ocean. So anyway, it had this big fly bridge, and it had two staterooms. It had the master stateroom was aft with a head, and then the forward stateroom, it was twin bunks. And then the salon was a salon galley altogether. It had it had a freezer and a refrigerator dorm size. And I said, Lee, I can't live with this dorm size refrigerator. And this was our big argument. And this went on for 3 years. He goes, oh, he'll be fine. He goes, we'll just get another dorm refrigerator. You'll have plenty of refrigerator. We've got that Yeti cooler. It'll all be good. Don't worry. You're going to have plenty of, I said, it's not, I'm worried about how much space I have. It's getting down on my hands and knees every time I got to find something. But anyway, so fast forward, he's now getting ready to work on the boat some and get it ready. So he has a buddy down there for the weekend to help him. So they're working along, and at the end of the day, Mike says to him, so where's the beer? And he goes, oh, it's in, and all of our friends had heard the story that I need a bigger refrigerator, right? And so Lee says, oh, it's down there in the refrigerator. And Mike opens up this dorm size refrigerator and goes, dude, this is not going to do. And so then they spent the rest of the weekend measuring on exactly what size of a, not a full size refrigerator, but what size of refrigerator they could get through the salon door. It had to take the door off. And so I ended up with a 13 cubic foot refrigerator with the freezer on the bottom.
Mm-hmm.
And Lee had to he took out cabinets and he had to retrofit it. And then he built me a cabinet that was really quite ingenious. It opened, instead of it opened from the front, because that's how it was built to be, it opened from the side and it had slide outs that slid out. And so it was plenty big enough. The box itself was the same size. It just opened differently.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't lose any of my storage space. I did lose a little bit of counter space, but it was worth every penny of it. So that was, and so the boat, it was an older boat. It was an 81 Chung Hwa, which is a Taiwanese built trawler. And just like all of those Taiwanese built boats, it had some issues with leaking windows.
Mm-hmm.
And so Lee fixed all that. He repaired all that. He took all the windows out and repaired all that. We reupholstered all of the cushions on the fly bridge. We didn't do any reupholstering in the salon. It had, when we sold it, the salon in the forward stateroom had the original upholstery on it. It had teak floors throughout. We painted the deck and we stripped all the wood down, all the outdoor wood down, and then brought it back up, and it was beautiful.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
what did you tell us what you named the boat? Because that's always a question I forget to ask, and there's usually
what we named it.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Well, we kept the original name because I wasn't willing to jump off the boat naked and swim around counterclockwise if you're going to change the name of the boat.
The old boat naming rituals, yes.
Yeah, but that really wasn't the reason we kept it. It just fit. The name of the boat was on Tiki Island, which is in Galveston, and the name of the boat was the Tiki Queen. Mm-hmm. And to me, it just fit. Yeah. And it must have fit because people don't even remember us, but they remember that boat.
That happens a lot with boat names.
Yeah, so when we sold the boat in Mobile, the guy that bought it is a retired pharmacist in Lake Charles, and he didn't change it either. So mm-hmm. she's in Lake Charles, and she's still the Tiki Queen.
Yeah. So one of the things that's a little bit different about your story is that you did start from the Houston area, started your loop from there. Mm-hmm. We've got lots of loopers who are planning the journey, and many that are in the Houston area. We did one of our looper lifestyle seminars there several months ago and had a huge turnout. People came from all over, but there were many from Houston. So let's kind of talk about, when you started the loop, how long it took you, etc. But tell us especially about the part of the journey that started from Houston till you caught up with the actual Great Loop route around Mobile Bay.
Well, we started from Houston, like I said, September. I think it was the 6th. I'm pretty sure it was the day after Labor Day. I think it was September 6th. And just a little side note. Of course, we were down there and we were working. Lee retired a year before I did, and I didn't move on to the boat until July of that summer. But we were down there every weekend, and there's lots of marine stores in and around the Kemah area and the Seabrook area and Clear Lake. And we were in one of the bigger marine stores, and Lee looks up and goes, "Captain Chris?" And he goes, "Yeah, what are you doing here?" And Lee said, "What are you doing here?" And he goes, "Oh, I'm training some folks on their new boat. They're going to do the loop." And he goes, "You have to meet them." And so we did. And that was Curtis and Michaeline Phantom. And we never caught up with them. We kind of started at the same time, but we never caught up with them until we got up in around the Albemarle Sound, and that's where we caught up with them. And then we saw them again in Brewerton, but then I'll tell you about that. We got stuck in Brewerton, and you'll have to ask me about that, and I'll tell you all about that.
Okay.
Last storm was in Amarillo.
Yeah,
They
then
had the Texas two-step.
they had the Texas
Ah,
two
yes, I remember that boat too.
we did see them in Amarillo. We visited them. But anyway, what was your question?
I wanted you to just kind of tell us about your loop, kind of in general
yeah,
terms,
okay,
you know,
that's
when
right,
you
yeah,
started, how long it took, what
right.
year was it?
It
But
was
also specifically, you know, that journey out of Houston.
Yeah, so it was September 17th. And we left and we went across Galveston Bay, and that got us back into the intercoastal behind where did Carrie and Jeff live? What's the name of that island? Oh my God. Well, anyway,
Bolivar.
Bolivar Island. We got behind Bolivar Island and we stayed at the Stingery restaurant. They have a couple docks there that are very rickety, but we stayed there and the water is very shallow. It's very, very skinny. And so we are leaving there the next morning, and we're now keep in mind this is the next morning. We already are having an issue. And the issue is Lee says to me, I don't have any steering. I'm like, what do you mean you don't have any steering? He goes, I can't steer the boat. He goes, I don't know if it needs steering fluid or whatever. So he was putting steering fluid in the upstairs helm station, and it was leaking to the floor in the downstairs helm station.
Thanks.
So with our bow thruster, we are able to get over. There's a little tug that is tied up. And we can get over to him and tie up along. He said, just tie up alongside me and I'll help you figure out what's going on. Well, so he did, and he came aboard, and it was a little O-ring in that downstairs station that it was just leaking all this fluid, the steering fluid all over the place. So he and Lee took it apart, fixed it. He then gave me a recipe, which I put in our journal, in order to make this fluid because we didn't have any. He had some, but we didn't have any. So
you can take diesel, a certain portion of diesel and a certain portion of motor oil, and mix it together and make power steering fluid.
Wow.
If you need it anyway.
Yeah, so I put that recipe in the journal. And so then we got underway and we just began that process. We went the next place, I guess, of significance that we stopped. Now you have to keep in mind that this whole intercoastal is very, very commercial. And not only is it very, very commercial, but it's very, very windy. And we're a trawler. We don't go very fast. And so to get around these tugs, you have to be on the radio constantly. And they are so gracious. They were so gracious to us. And so then we anchored. We went through the Berwick locks, which are very industrial, and we anchored in a little lake that's kind of off of the intercoastal. And the next morning, and we put 2 anchors out, and the next morning, we get ready to pull anchor. And you have to keep in mind where we're deep, deep in Cajun country, and there's alligators going into the water and coming out all around us. And so Lee pulls the aft anchor and he goes to start the boat, and she won't start. I'm like, what do you mean she won't start?
Day 2, second day of problems.
Yeah, she won't start. And it was a fuel filter. But anyway, long story short, some guys in a John boat, they come cruising by, and they say, well, are you having problems? And Lee goes, I can't get my boat started. And this one guy said, well, I'm a diesel mechanic. Do you mind if I come over and look at it? And these guys were so incredible. It was a father-in-law and a son-in-law. And he said he worked on, he goes, I don't know what's wrong with it. But I had no cell service. no Verizon cell service. They had AT&T, and so I used their phone. The best thing we ever purchased was Boat US tow insurance, and so I
Mhm.
called them. This is what a newbie I am. I didn't even realize you could raise them on the radio. I could have
Mhm.
raised them on the radio. I didn't even
Mhm.
know that. Okay. I know that now, but I didn't then. So Boat US sent somebody, towed us back through the Berwick locks and took us to the Berwick dock, which is a very, very commercial dock, and said the next morning, he said, the tow guy said, I'm going to send a mechanic down here. I know a mechanic. And so that mechanic comes. And so I'm sitting in the helm. They got the whole engine compartment pulled apart, and I'm sitting in the helm seat. And I'm vacillating between crying and praying. I'm like, oh my God, how much? And I'm calculating in my head. I'm like, okay, this guy can't figure this out. I'm going to have to get a mechanic. We're probably going to have to fly a mechanic in here. Cha-ching. We're going to have to put him up. Cha-ching. He's going to come aboard and fix whatever's wrong. Cha-ching. I'm getting all this. And so then Lee says, I'm going to call American Diesel. And so he calls American Diesel, and the guy said, Brian, he says, what kind of fuel filters you got going on there? And Lee had changed the fuel filters right before we went to Avery Island. And what did you tell? You tell
It was a Wix filter or whatever. And he said, oh, well, take it off and throw it away. He said, don't use Wix filters. He said, that's your problem. And Brian with American Diesel, because American Diesel just knows everything about a Ford Lehman engine.
Mhm.
So I listened to what Brian said. I changed the filter and put the right filter on there, and we never had any problem after that.
No, that's not true.
Well,
we did have a problem. That's a
solved the
story.
problem.
That got us started. So then we start our journey again. We go back through the Berwick locks, and we're traveling along, and very commercial. Keep in mind, very
Mhm.
commercial. And there's a tug coming towards us, and Lee says, I don't have any steering. He goes, I don't have any power. I said, what do you mean you don't have any power? He goes, the engine is dead. I'm like, what? And so I get on the radio and I call this guy and I said, we're the pleasure craft that is off your bow and we don't have any power. He said, what do you mean you don't have any power? And I said, we don't have any power. He goes, oh, I won't say what he said.
Mhm.
And I'm like, and Lee's got the bow thruster, and that's all he has. And we were able to get into a little oxbow where they were painting on some big old commercial barge. And so we get in there, and these guys are painting. And I said, hey, can you tie us off? We don't have any power. And these guys are just painting away, and they're just looking at me. I said, hey, will you take a rope and tie us off? I mean, they're just painting away. They don't even, and here comes two guys in street clothes and they go, what's wrong, ma'am? And I said, we don't have any power and we got to fix this boat. Can you tie us off? He said, sure. Throw us a rope. And they tied us off and they were painting these big ballers on the boat, New York cab yellow. So I threw my brand new ropes up there. And he tied us off, and Lee got the boat going, and he gave me my ropes back, and they were all had the yellow markings all on it. Tied them off. So that was our second debacle, our third debacle, I guess, and we haven't even gotten out of Louisiana yet.
Yeah, and I think let's take a break and play a message from one of our sponsors. When we come back, I want to kind of jump to how you kind of recovered from the early challenges and what you really got out of the loop. So, we'll talk a little bit about what the loop has meant for you when we come back. So we'll be back in a moment. Schooner Island Marina is the only full-service floating dock marina on the island in Wildwood, New Jersey, offering ship store, pool, brokerage and new boat sales, gas and diesel, mobile pump out, and a full-service yard for any repair needs. Even better for loopers, you can walk to grocery, convenience stores, shops, and restaurants. Wildwood offers one of the most expansive beaches in South Jersey and the best amusement park rides, all within a 15-minute walk. A short ride up the ICW from Cape May Inlet leads you to our well-protected marina. Visit SchoonerIslandMarina.com for more info. We're back on Great Loop Radio. Today we are talking with Karen and Lee McClellan. They are gold loopers who completed the loop a few years back, and they are sharing the story of their Great Loop and telling us about some of their adventures. So, Karen and Lee, you were kind of filling us in on a less than illustrious start to your loop where you had several issues kind of back to back. And honestly, I feel like that's not all that uncommon, even if you've done some shakedown cruises. This is when you start off on the loop, it's the first time perhaps that you're doing some of this extended cruising aboard the boat. So it's not all that unusual to have a couple of rough patches at the start. But and I know from chatting with you that even with those challenges overall, your loop was, I think you have called it an epic adventure. So tell us a little bit about what doing the Great Loop has meant to you. How did the journey change the two of you?
Well, it certainly made us realize that we could work together. And Lee, I don't know if Lee was ever afraid of anything. There were times that I was. There were times when the water was so rough, and I was thinking, Lord have mercy, I'm going to go downstairs. And because to get up to our flybridge, you have to go up to these 2 steps. I mean, they were deep steps, and they weren't like on the Grand Banks where they were just little steps. They were big fiberglass indentions. And I thought I could like get thrown off this boat and Lee wouldn't even know. But I think that, we really learned that we could work together. We really learned without a doubt that you shouldn't wait. You should do it, because this is probably one of the most epic things we've ever done. And people are just amazed. And so, you get bragging rights. And I don't mean that to sound arrogant, but it's something that very few people ever do. And certainly there's people that start it and they don't complete it. I think that I learned a lot about the country. I learned a lot about myself. I always kind of thought that maybe Lee might have a health issue, but he didn't. I did. I broke my arm in Tarpon Springs and didn't even know it, that it was broken. We were getting ready to leave Tarpon Springs and start down the west coast of Florida, and because we were meeting people in Key West. And Lee said, well, do you want to go to the hospital? We got to get to Key West. You want to go to the hospital? We got to get to Key West. And I thought, far be it from me to keep us from getting from Key West. So it wasn't until I got to Key West that I got an x-ray and found out that my elbow was broken. So I had that issue. And I don't know what we learned about each other and the loop. I think that it just brought us closer together.
I don't remember any issues that I felt like were really horrible issues. The fuel issue, we're sitting in the intercoastal waterway, very safe, very protected. No main problem. Now it was inconvenienced, and I had worked on shrimp boats. I had been from Gulf Shores, Alabama, to Nags Head, North Carolina, for 2 years working on shrimp boats. I really didn't feel like I started the loop until we started up the Hudson River.
I agree with that.
The scenery from Galveston to New Jersey, the scenery don't change. It's just, wow, this is boring. But once we started up the Hudson River, I felt like, wow, I got a education in geography. And my whole life, I grew up in the South. And I thought, well, that was a low Lyria going up north. People up north are strange. Well, that's not true.
She's from Nashville.
I was in Brewerton, New York, and I called my brother on the phone and I said, hey man, I said, we've been fed fake news our whole life. I said, these people up here are nice. I said, there's farmers and wineries and fishermen. And I said, you get about 30 miles north of New York City, and people just, when we think of New York, we think of New York City. And I said, it's just fake news our whole life. We've been fed fake news. I said,
Yep.
I can live up here.
Yeah.
These are nice people. And
Yep,
so
and
geographically travel, it educated me a lot.
yeah. Well, and I think I've said this recently on our podcast, but one of the quotes I love about the Great Loop, and I think it applies in your situation too, is that it's enough of a challenge to be an accomplishment when you finish it. So that, you know, the challenges you have along the way are part of what makes it that sense of accomplishment when you finish it. But it's not so challenging that the whole thing becomes a huge ordeal. You know, it's challenging enough to be an accomplishment, but not so challenging that it's an ordeal to do it. And I have found that to be true on my way around as well. So as we start to run out of time already, tell us any advice that you would give to people who are just now contemplating whether or not to do the loop.
Do it. Don't
Mhm.
wait. Do it, and take your time. Anchor more. Definitely take your time. We were on the loop for 2 years, but that was really because we lost our transmission at Lock 22 on the Erie Canal and had to get towed to Brewerton. And so then by the time they got all that fixed, it was just too late to go on up into Canada. So we stored the boat for 6 months. And it's okay. You can store the boat. The boat stayed in Apalachicola for 40 days. We weren't on it, but the boat was there because you know, it was the holidays and we went home for the holidays and all of that. Do not overpack that boat. Do not, because you don't need all that stuff. You do not need all that stuff. And there is a Walmart in every port. You know, you can get, if you need something, you can get it. That's one of the things I wish that I had not taken even half of what I took, because we didn't need it. We never wore it. We never used it. We didn't, you know, you don't need it. So, but I suppose that the two, if we were to ever do this again, which I don't think we are, but if we ever were to do this again, we would anchor a whole lot more and we would slow down.
And the cost of it, I think we have spent more in the last 2 years
On land,
because
yeah.
of inflation and living in an apartment and trying to build a house. The loop was cheap compared to building a house now.
I mean,
Yeah.
you're gonna do all those things anyway. You're gonna go out to dinner. You got to buy groceries. You got to put fuel in your car. And we were lucky. Diesel was cheap when we did the loop compared to what it is now. So we were very, very fortunate. But you still, you know, you have to put fuel in your vehicles, and you have all the maintenance on your home. And we kept our dirt house, but we leased it. So we were then again very fortunate that when we had to come off the boat for those 5 months, 6 months, whatever it was, we had a friend that had a guest house, and we stayed in her guest house. So we were very fortunate from that perspective. But
So,
absolutely take your time.
and tell us, just last question, why do you say anchor more? What is it about anchoring that you wish you had done more of?
Because it's just so peaceful, and it's just, it really allows you to get back to nature and to really enjoy what is so important about the loop. Now, don't get me wrong, docktails are amazing. We had our first docktail experience in at Half Moon Bay. That was our very first docktail. We never did any docktails, and then in Campbellford, Canada, then we had this huge docktail event, and we met people there that we have held on to and will continue to hold on to. You will meet lots and lots of people, but there will be some people that you will never forget. And those folks that we met in Campbellford, I will never forget those people.
Oh, I love to hear that.
The locks, you know, you've been through a lot of locks now, so you know that they're not intimidating. They're not.
They're really not
scary. People hear horror stories and have fears that after we have went through about 80 locks, and after we anchored about 20 or 30 times, that's why I said we'd anchor a lot more now. First lock we came to in Louisiana that Karen was very nervous because we heard all
Oh.
these horrible lock
Mhm.
stories with,
That was in New Orleans.
and we
Yeah.
came up to the lock in New Orleans, and I called for a lock open, and he said just float around, Captain. He said when this toe comes out, he said just drive straight through. He said he the water level was right. He didn't go up or down. I just drove through the lock.
The
Oh wow, that was pretty easy.
The
Yeah.
commercial lock and the pleasure craft lock in Houston was closed for repair, so we had to go through the commercial lock.
Mhm.
And so I called for that, and he goes, yeah, he goes, great. He goes, I'm going to bring you in. He goes, I've got a double toe in here, and I'm bringing a single toe in, and you're going to come in and tie up to the single toe. I said, what? He goes, it'll be fine, don't worry, because I heard all these horror stories. You don't ever tie up to those toes because you'll get crunched. And
Right.
he goes, it'll be fine. I've already talked to them, and they're waiting on you. And I'm like, okay. So you gotta have faith.
There's a first for all of those things, and the first time can be a little bit disconcerting, but even when it doesn't go the way you expect, it's usually not a significant problem.
No,
You hear the horror stories.
Our little fuel issues that we had. Now she makes it sound like it was a horrible issue, but it's like if you were fishing on Lake Murray and you had a fuel filter stop up on your outboard motor.
It makes for a good
And
story
so,
when you tell
It
okay.
people.
makes for the good stories, and I think for
Yeah.
those who maybe are a little
It's
bit
just a
reluctant,
little
they latch
issue.
onto those.
Yeah.
And
Don't be
even the
afraid, and-
challenges are overcomable. So I hope
Yes.
people have
And
listened to
all
this
the
and gotten that
women-
message.
All the women out there,
Mhm.
they just need to do it. They can go home anytime they want and see those grandbabies. That's okay.
That
And
is
those
so true.
grandbabies are still gonna be there. We went home a lot, and it just do it. Do it.
All right. We are out of time, so we're going to hold it there. But Karen and Lee McClellan, thank you so much for sharing the story of your loop and some of your challenges and highlights along the way.
When
Enjoy.
you get back to Somerville, let us know. You and Michael can come up for dinner.
We
have a
would
new
love
house
to.
in
Because
Mullenville.
we're neighbors now, and Karen and Leila McClellan are now in McClellanville. So are you the mayor now?
Well, no, not exactly, but we are going to be harbor hosts. We want to be harbor hosts for
Oh, that would be
McClellanville
wonderful.
and certainly promote McClellanville. So it's a great
It's a great
little
town.
fishing
It
village.
really is.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right.
Kim,
Well,
thank you so
both.
much for
Oh,
having
my
us.
pleasure. Thank you for being here. And thanks to everyone who has listened and watched today. We'll be back next week with another episode of Great Loop Radio. Until then, safe cruising.